Lesson 87, Factoring Polynomials by Grouping. So when you have a polynomial with 4 terms, you need to make 2 groups and then factor out the GCF for each and then factor one more time. So when a polynomial has 4 terms, you're going to make 2 groups and then factor out the greatest common factor for each, and then repeat. So here's an example. We have 5x squared plus 10xy plus 3x plus 6y. So here is a polynomial with 4 terms. We're going to make 2 groups. So I'm going to look at the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. And I want to factor. So I'm just looking at 5x squared plus 10xy. We can factor out a 5 and an x. And we're left with x plus 2y. Plus, then I'm only looking at the second one. I'm going to factor out a 3. And I have x plus 2y. Now I have 2 terms. So this term and this term, and we need to factor again. So they both have an x plus 2y, so we'll pull that out, x plus 2y, and we're left with 5x plus 3. So this is our 4-termed polynomial factored. Okay, here's another example. Sometimes you have to rearrange in order to factor. So I'm going to, let's see, I want to put the 5 here with this 5x squared. So I'm going to change it to be 5x squared plus 5. Then I have my minus 12x cubed minus 12x. Now when I group, I want to have a plus sign here. So I'm going to do plus a negative 12x cubed. So I still have that plus sign between. So in the first term, I can factor out a 5, and I get x squared plus 1. And then this second term, I'm going to factor out a negative 12x, and I'm left with x squared plus 1. So then I have these 2 terms, and I'm going to factor out an x squared plus 1, and I'm left with 5 plus a negative 12x. Well, plus a negative just means minus. And this is now factored. If I were to do FOIL, I would get back what I started with. Okay, one more example. Sometimes we can factor out the greatest common factor before we even begin grouping. So I can factor out a 2z squared out of all of these. So I can put 2z squared, and then what's left is a 27xz plus, this is going to be a 3x minus 9z minus 1. Then I'm going to factor by grouping. So I have 2z squared. And I'm going to group the first 2 and the last 2. Remember, I want a plus sign here, so I'm going to do negative 9z minus 1. And I'm going to factor out, so I still have my 2z squared, and I'm going to factor out of the first one a 3x. So I have 3x parentheses 9z plus 1. And then here I'm going to factor out a negative 1, and I have 9z plus 1. And finally, I'm going to factor out 9z plus 1, and then I'm left with 3x plus a negative 1, which just means 3x minus 1. Oops, I don't need that bracket there. And that's the final factorization. Now sometimes you can factor trinomials by grouping. So let me just show you the rules here. If you have ax squared plus bx plus c, and we're going to do an example and write down the steps, okay? So the step 1, you're going to multiply a and c. So in this case, our a is 5 and our c is positive 6. So we're going to take 5 times 6 and we get 30. Step 2 is to find 2 factors of that product. So we're going to say find 2 factors of a times c that add to b. So we need to find 2 factors of 30 that add to negative 13, because b is a negative 13. Well, I know 15 times 2, let's see, will that work? Is 30, but that doesn't work because they would have to both be the same sign, and 15 plus 2 is 17, not 13. So how about, not 30 times 1, oh, 10 times 3. So if I had a negative 10 times a negative 3, that equals positive 30, and negative 10 plus a negative 3, oh, that equals negative 13. Okay, so we need to use negative 10 and negative 3. So step 3 is to replace b with the factors, those 2 factors that you found. So we're going to have now 5x squared. Instead of writing negative 13x, we're going to put minus 10x minus 3x. Then we still have the plus 6. And then the last step is to factor by grouping, like what we learned today. So I'm going to group the first 2, and then I'm going to add a negative 3x and group the second 2. So in the first 2, I'm going to take out a 5x, and I'm left with x minus 2. And then on the second group, I'm going to factor out a negative 3 so that I can have an x minus 2. Now they both have an x minus 2, so we're going to factor it as x minus 2, and we're left with 5x minus 3. And now this trinomial is factored. And that's the end of the lesson.